Alrighty. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Sorry I started a little late. Had to take care of some things, but we are in it now. Hello, Solomon. Nice to see you again. Yeah, let's just jump right into it. It's kind of hectic this Saturday. We're going to be focusing today mainly on lambdas. It came up last session. It was kind of a question. And it's a topic that's not really talked about too much in the scripting channel. It's out there as like a thing you can do, but I'm gonna spend some time today to sort of talk a little bit about what a lambda is and how to use it. So just a little background. The TLDR of a lambda is that it's a way of doing a unit of work given a player. And so this is an important part of a lambda because a lot of times we're trying to find the place in the code to hook into so that we can actually call our code, right? We write custom code, we want to hook into base DayZ, and the question of where do we actually call our code and do stuff is an important one. And so for lambdas are very specific to a player, all right? And I'm not sure the reason for it. I haven't dug too deep into it, but every time I see a lambda, there's always a player object involved, and it's always done in some sort of action or event. So, there's probably a reason for this. Other than, I don't know, so I won't even speculate on it. Hello, Jack Ryan, good to see you. So what I'm going to do here is I have my DayZ projects open in VS Code. I'm going to Control-Shift-F so that I can search all files, and I'm just going to type in lambda, search for it. A bunch of stuff is going to come up, which is good. That means there's a lot of documentation and things that we can oh, thank you. I gotta share my screen for the Discord. It's recording. Thank you. Haven't really missed much. I've been on this same screen the entire time, so searching for lambda will bring up a bunch of options. I'm gonna go ahead and close out some of these modded ones. All right, cool. Now we're in vanilla land. Let's go ahead and click on some of these and see what do we get when we type in lambda AB. And we see a couple things in here. In the man.c file, we got this replace item with new IMPL. I'm assuming that IMPL is meant for implementation, so a shorthand. Not entirely certain though. It gives us an inventory mode, and then we see this thing here, this type called replace item with new lambda base. And so if you don't know anything in this case, at the very least the flag should go off in your head by saying, oh, there's like the word lambda in this function. This must be something valuable. So if you had that intuition or thought, like, good on you, because we're gonna go double click on this and kind of see what's up. But if you didn't, kind of start thinking in the mindset of when you're searching for stuff, like, get in that mode, find a keyword, look for it in the game, and then continue following that pathway down. And if we look on some of these other ones, we can see a few other functions like replace item elsewhere with new in hands, and then it's got this local and server stuff. We don't have to worry about that because that's DayZ, like building the server and client interactions. What we really care about is this base function here. So I'm going to go ahead and double click it so it highlights, and then Control-Shift-F, which will automatically populate it over here in my search filter. And we'll just press enter, right? Let's see where in the game does does this thing get used? Let's see some of my things I've used here. Where do we define this? And actually, I'm gonna go and refine this since I'm wanting the class declaration and definition of this. I'm just gonna prefix my search term with class. That way it narrows it all down. Cool, it takes me exactly to the place I want to go. All right, let's look at this class and what it has. Here's got a comment, the name, replace item with new lambda base. Hey, Derp, thank you. A base class for transformation operations, creating one item from another. And so already you can see the devs kind of talking about, hey, this is the intention of this class. It's to take an item and turn it into another. And so for any use case that you can kind of generically like think about in these steps, like I'm taking an item that is in my hands or on the ground or on my player and I'm turning it into something else. This is your thing. Essentially, it's a function for you. And there are a lot of ways this is used, like seeds and the die system uses it all over the place. Breaking wooden sticks, disarming explosives, unrestraining yourself, unboxing things. Like, oh my gosh, it's used everywhere. So, what is the guts of this class? What does it actually do? So, what it has inside of it is it has the old item, the item that like is going to be changed into something new. All right. And we have this item and we have it as an entity AI because we sometimes might want to pass on information from the parent. Like our old item has 50 health and we want our new item to also have 50 health. Or, you know, our old item has some custom properties that we've created on our modded item that Daisy's not going to transfer over in its normal transfer properties method. And we will want to sort of push those things along. It has the string, which represents the new item type. We only need the class name so that we can actually just create the object and then set the properties. We have two inventory locations. We have the old location of where the item currently exists, and then the new location of where we want it to go. All right, and this can be in hands, in my inventory, on the ground. And those are really the only three, I think. There might be a few more. And then remove from location past. Not sure what that is. Let's go and look at that variable for a second. Oh, okay, cool. This is a helper logging variable. So one of the cool things about a Lambda is that since they're very relatively complex and they have a sort of step-by-step process, you know, A through G, I think it's got like 8 steps. If a part of the process fails, the game will naturally just log it out. And so this is one of those variables that checks to see if it actually worked or not. And then this one also looks like the same thing. Remove from network objects. So as we're changing one item from another, we need to remove the old one. If it did remove, then we kind of like, yes, you know, thumbs up. If it didn't get removed from the network, you know, thumbs up or thumbs down. Okay, so we have the constructor for this class, which is what happens when we make a new Lambda base. And you'll see that in the code, you know, when we, let's go ahead and use Solomon's example of action break wooden stick. Right, so when we talk about making a new Lambda, and I say that in air quotes, you know, we're newing up an object, right? There's the literal word new right here. And so when we have a new object, we have to create it. And I've talked about this in my other videos. And this function right here is what allows us to do that initialization work. And so if there's like extra stuff we want to do in here, we would, you know, make our own Lambda, kind of like you see here in break wooden stick, and we would add it in our own constructor. So just kind of comparing these side by side here, as our parent class, replace item with new Lambda base. In break long wooden stick over here on the right, we are inheriting from that class. And so in the prior videos, you've heard us talk about inheritance and how if I inherit from a parent, I get all of the stuff. And so the stuff over here on the left is technically still here on the right. It just doesn't have to be rewritten. Okay. And since we have a new class, I have a new constructor. And in this case, I am passing through the item count or the total number of broken sticks I want. And this is important because in the parent class constructor over here on the left, it's also setting up the old item and the new item. And you might be saying, tree, do we have to do that in the new class over here? And my answer is no, because in DayZ, when you inherit from a parent class, the parent constructor is sort of appended to yours. And so you can imagine like the order of this to be something like this. All right, I'm going to comment this out just for posterity, because in reality, when the compiler runs our code, it's going to see the parent class's constructor stuff, like its guts in here, and then it will put mine at the end of it. And then if there were other classes, it would also put it at the end of mine. You know, if I inherited it again, more downstream calls. And so this is kind of one of the benefits of inheritance, and I won't touch on that any further, but just understand that my break long wooden stick class that inherits from the replace item with new Lambda base also has this same reference to the old item and like the name of the new item. Okay. If it didn't, this wouldn't work. I'm gonna go ahead and Control Z all that back to a good state. Okay. And it looks like if we continue looking in the parent class, just decomposing this class, we see that we can override the new location. We can set explicitly where this new item will go. We can verify the item by slot type. This is a helper class that the devs have provided us that we can override in here. And so I could do something like, you might be like, Tree, why is this function empty? And the answer is, well, sometimes, just having it in the parent class allows us to just come in here and then do whatever we want in a we did it, right? So it's just a helper, right? And it allows me to do extra stuff. So let's see if it's actually used anywhere in the code. Oh, okay, look, yeah. Looks like turn item into item Lambda has its own stuff, which if you look at this guts of this function, it's huge, right? You can set transfer params that'll naturally just transfer any agents, any variables, any health. It'll allow you to exclude the quantity, or you can override the quantity itself. And then there's even a copy old properties to new. And so here it looks like verify item by slot type. If the new location's type is equal to an attachment and the old item config is existing, change into unattached. Okay, so this looks like it's rags. Okay, cool. So this is code for like mouth restraints and unrestraining yourself. So that's kind of cool. So basically this code here allows us to check, hey, are we a mouth rag and can we actually even go in that slot? And if it can, then, we do it. Otherwise, we don't. That's what this if condition is. That's kind of cool. Let's see, create new entity, a helper function. If there's a new location and the new type is not empty string, so we actually have a class we want to change into and we have a place to go. Can execute Lambda. If we have the old item and the game can actually remove the entity from the old item, then return true. Otherwise, we can't execute this Lambda. This is important. Putting guardrails on your functions is very important. Prepare locations. Okay, so it looks like we're getting into, I mentioned earlier that Lambdas have several steps and they could potentially fail at each step. And so the process is fairly well documented. And right here you see step A is to prepare inventory locations. And I'm not going to go over all these guts because you can review them on your own time. But basically it's checking to see if we can actually move the old to the new. Is it a legal operation? If not, it's going to log out. It will give you this error in the scripts that says step A1 failed to get old item inventory location. And so Lambdas are really easy to test. It'll tell you exactly where it's failing, and you can change your code to accommodate. The second step is to free the location for the new item. Make sure the inventory reservation of the new place is available. This is important. You don't want items overlapping each other. This is a very synchronous action. The client and server have to be in lockstep, as well as all the other clients on the server sort of kind of need to know this is happening. We have an undo, which is kind of like a, if you're familiar with SQL or database transactions, there's this notion of like trying to do some work and then a rollback. Yep. And if you succeed, then you can kind of commit the work to be saved. And so in this case, they have an undo. They do a little bit of work, check to see if it works, and if it didn't, then roll back. Step C, remove the network part of the object. So since we're getting rid of an old object, we need to actually physically remove it from the network synchronization of the game. This doesn't have to be too scary for new modders. You definitely shouldn't be calling this stuff on your own unless you know what you're doing. But basically, you could think of the game objects as being stored in a big list. It doesn't really matter how that list is stored. But every time a new object is created, it's added to this list so that it can be, synchronized over the network, because the clients need to know where objects are in the world as well. And when I remove an object from the server, I also need to be able to unlink that from my client and my network state. So this is how you do that. And it essentially forces the server to send a delete object message to the client. That's what this comment here is saying. And if that works, if this doesn't blow up in your face, then we set our variable to true. If you notice, we have the undo, where basically it will actually just recreate that network location, the networked object. It's important for like simulations or just the client even be able to interact with the object. Okay, so we have the old item removed from our inventory. We have it removed from the network. We're going to create the new entity. And so it does a lot of stuff to say, hey, is it going to go on the ground? Is it an attachment? Does it go on my inventory? And there's a couple log message about that. Step E, copy properties from the old object to the new object. Pretty self-explanatory. Now, since we've done all of the data changes, we no longer need the old item. And so now we're actually able to delete the object. And so you'll notice here that they call delete safe. There are a couple, if you actually search the game, you'll see several deletes. Or object delete, I think is what it's called. Object delete. Yeah, there's getGame.objectDelete, and then there's this delete safe. And we'll get a couple questions every now and then. People be like, what's the difference? Right? So let's kind of look at what the difference is. If we search for object delete, we'll notice that there are actually a few ways to delete an object, and there's object delete on client, so I have to assume the first one is like a server function. Remote object delete and remote object tree delete. And so this is all the ways you can control the state of an object, but then there's also delete save. Where is this defined? Void. Yeah. And you'll notice that this one is defined in entity AI. And it calls delete. There's a juncture to delete item as well inside of the player, which then sends a delete item, which sends another sync juncture to set to delete, which eventually goes and gets the item, reads what the item is, and adds the item to delete, adds it to a list to delete. And it sets the item to be prepared to delete. And then we add it to a list of items to delete. And then eventually we delete the object. So I'm not sure. Personally, I can't answer the question like which one's better. Given what I've seen with Lambdas, I think delete safe is probably the better option because it's synced with the junctures of the client instead of If I go all the way back to get game, just forcing the object to delete. And I think this is more for static objects and like Daisy editor stuff and things that are uninteractable, like trees. Well, I shouldn't say uninteractable, but I would expect this to be more like a tree or a house or like a decal or something along those lines. Something that's like not simulated. Anyway, I prefer delete safe in most cases. G. So now we've deleted the old item. Now let's network the new item so that people can see it and interact with it. And then last, if everything worked, step H, notify that we've finished. Right, and so there's A through H. That's quite a few steps for a Lambda, but necessary for all the important things that are happening during that process. And then anytime there's a helper function for on abort, which gives us a nice log error for when we're aborting, and it'll happen after a log message comes out. All right, so that's the steps. So how do we actually get it to do something? Well, that's what the execute is for. And if you'll notice, the execute function takes a property called human inventory with FSM, full state manager. I believe that's what that stands for. And that's because sometimes you're doing stuff with your hands and there's an animation involved or whatever. Like, sometimes you just need that information. And so here you can see it connecting all of the pieces. Here's the A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. And so technically you could override this execute function inside of your own Lambda if you wanted, although not really wise unless you know what you're doing, but you technically can. And then lastly, there's a helper function called dump to string. That's the base guts of the parent class and sort of what they're useful for. We didn't cover inventory location, so let's just jump into that real quick. What is this? So it looks like inventory location is a 3 game class inside of inventory. Has a helper function called isValid, get type, get parent, get item, get slot. Okay, so basically it's everything you need to know about an inventory location. If you were going to make like a custom sorter, this is probably where you would do some of your logic. Well, not with native functions, unfortunately. These are all engine classes, so we can only assume what they do based on the comments. If I keep going, set cargo, direct methods. So I guess this is how you would tell an item where it goes. Dump to string. If it's on the ground, we're on unknown. Sorry. Can be an unknown state, the ground. It could be an attachment. It could be cargo. It could be hands. It could be proxy cargo, or it could be in a vehicle. Oh, Ganri, this sounds like something useful for you. Here's all the places an item can be. These are the only places. And it looks like it's passing the information through context, so this is kind of like binary script syncing. It's reading some information. Writing a bunch of information. Optional location, write to context. Read from context. All right. Okay, so how do we use a Lambda, right? Let's actually stop talking about the theory and start getting into the application. It was inventory location. I don't know. I was thinking about your add child question the other day about like how do you know where an item is and like what happens when it goes into different places. And I just saw these inventory locations and I was like, oh, there might be something surrounding this if it's even exposed to us. But that's an aside. Let's look into the action break stick and see how it actually uses a Lambda. I'm gonna swap these over. So as always, one of the easiest way to invoke a Lambda is through an action, mainly because you have reference to a player object. You can't invoke a Lambda without a player object. It's really important. It's probably the hardest thing to uh, hardest thing to supply. It's like I can create an object at any time. I can give a string at any time, and I can give like custom data anytime I want. But a player is like a difficult reference of an object to get. There's either a list of players on the server, or you are the player yourself and you're interacting with something else in the world or another player, like from the code perspective. And so getting a reference to a player is actually quite difficult if you're just trying to call code in a random spot in the world or in script world. So usually you either create lambdas and actions, or a recipe, or in player base. Those are really the three places you see it. All right, so the callback is just how long does it take when we have a continuous action. Talking a little bit about actions, mixing. If I search for action continuous base, and let me go and put class in front of it so that we can sort of sift these options down. But if you look, there are quite a few actions, and I know the devs have been updating these recently, so my knowledge might be somewhat changed. Like I don't recognize this loop base. This feels like a new one. But anyway, there are a couple different types of actions. There's instant actions. There are interact actions. So instant would be debug. Okay, that's why it didn't come up. But action interact is something like opening a door. Action single use is something like opening a can of tuna. And then action continuous base is like chopping down a tree or mining a log. And there are different events that are called in those workflows. And so often I'll see people copy an action that they like and then change either the inherited class, or not change the callback class or the command UID or the stance mask, and they'll wonder why their action doesn't work. And you can't really mix and match these things. And it's been a while since I've sort of dived into why. You can search the animation channel in the modders Discord for a gentleman named Mario. He and I have talked about it a little bit, and he's sort of laid out why you can't do it. But the TLDR is basically, I think there are like keyframes inside the animations that are looking for some of these things, and you just can't like merge an FB, a full body command, with like a mod action. And so if I were to Control Shift F on this action and go to the whole list of actions, you kind of see like here's all the emotes and things that you can do. And so let's go ahead and scroll up so that we can actually see what these mean. All right, so we have interrupt actions, which is no animations, just blend. We have finish, which is finishing an action. End, which is stopping an action without finishing. The action itself, one time or a loop. And then there's a couple states a player can be in when doing an animation. There's erect, which is standing, crouching, and prone for proning. And these are the poses that the animations can start from. Okay, and that's important. All right, because when you're chaining animations together, they have to lead into a state that the next animation can start from. And looks like you can add the loop state in here. So if you look at these, you'll see that for every single action or modifier that we have, it shows us the states that it can be in. And so you can usually you can usually mix and match the ones inside of the same categories. Not all the time, but some of the times. And you can kind of see how they line up. As always, when you're learning, it's usually best to just find the action that matches what you're trying to do and then use that. Okay. Condition targets and condition components. So this is another area that can bite a new modder in the butt as to why my action isn't working. So it's registered, it's added to the item. I know it works because my logs are printing that it's added, but it's the prompt isn't showing up. Well, most likely, if that's the case, then either your action condition is false, but it's also possible that these condition components are not set up correctly. And these are like pre-filters for an action that happen very early on in the action lifecycle, and it will filter out your action from the potential actions of an item or a list or for the player. And if you notice, there's one for the item, so the item in my hands, or the item my action is associated to, and the target that I'm looking at. And if we look here, for the item in our hands, the condition here is non-ruined. And there's a couple conditions, actually. As far as you know, condition components cancel actions, no effect on the prompt. Yeah, I mean, if you're considering canceling actions like not displaying the action, because like let's say I have an axe in my hand and I'm looking at a house. The house is filtered out from my actions because it's not a map object or a wooden object or whatever. Whereas if I was looking at a tree, it would be allowed because I would see the prompt because it is the action. It's the target that I'm looking for. And if you notice, for the item in my hands, there are a couple different options here. So I can say the item, I can expect no item in my hands, CCI none. I expect the item to be not ruined. I expect it to be not empty, so I'm drinking something. It should be not present, not ruined and dry, not ruined and empty, or present. What is the difference between not empty? Okay, so not empty is more of a quantity thing. What is none? Oh, none is no condition. Okay. So these are the different ways you can constrain the condition of my action based on the item in my hands, or lack thereof. Now, if I go to CCT none, so what about my target? What are some filters for my target? There's filter on my cursor, so only show targets that my cursor is interacting with, or my cursor doesn't have an object in it, doesn't have an object on it, or my cursor is on an object but the object is not ruined. Cursor parent, what's this one? This looks like a distance check from my head to the player. Is my target a man? Do I not have a target? Oh no, I don't have a target condition. My target is non-ruined. My target is an object. My target is myself, so there is no target. Or like I have nothing on my hands and I'm like able to bandage myself. I'm looking at a surface. Ah, here's the tree one. Yeah. So for cutting down a tree, there's a condition out there that says my target needs to be within a maximal distance, so probably 2 meters, and that thing is a tree. CCCT none has those conditions. Well, its conditions are true. It's just a pass through in this case. This is meaning there's no condition for my target. I mean, because basically, right, when we register all actions in the action register list, those are being looped over every single iteration of the game loop when I have, an item in my hands. I mean, maybe not all of them, but if I have a hammer in my hands, it's going to loop over all actions on that hammer. And these conditions are what filter out what I can and can't do. along with action condition. Because then, once we get forward saying, okay, I have a stick. Is the stick empty? So does it have quantity? It's probably a failsafe. Does the item not have an energy manager, and is it not working? So basically, is it not on fire? The sticks can be burnt. As a target, we don't care if there's a target. But the important thing is when I click my button and hold for breaking down a stick, what happens is we grab the main item, which is the long wooden stick. And we will make a lambda, which is a custom lambda called break long wooden stick that inherits from the base lambda that we talked about earlier. Okay. And if we look at what we're passing it, right, we're passing it information like the main item, so the old item, which is the wooden stick, string new item, which is the name, we want regular wooden sticks, the player that is actually doing the action, and then how many sticks we want. All right, pretty simple. And then to invoke the function, we tell the server to call this lambda. All right, now this is the magic essentially. This is where the magic happens. So within man, deep down inside of the man class, you have this function called replace item in hands with new. There are also a couple other lambda functions within missed gameplay functions, but the important part here is that at the very beginning of the video, we were talking about how its method signature or its parameters were expecting a lambda, and this is where like the linkage happens and why the player is the place where we call these functions. Okay, we're passing a lambda. We say do this unit of work, and vanilla has the functions in place to actually invoke that lambda to do the work. And so we say do the work, and then it does it. And so you might say, well, what does it do? Well, it does this. It gets the item count, which is 3. We said it was 3 up here. And it does all the lambda stuff we talked about, steps A through E. And then eventually it's going to get to the step E, which is copy properties into new. And you'll notice that our special lambda overrides this function. All right, and we do that because we want all the old stuff to happen. We want it to copy the properties like it does every other lambda. So we call super. Say, do your work that you would have done normally. Cool. All right, now, once you've done your work that you would have done, let's go ahead and do some new work, which is transfer my stick properties to my wooden stick, my long wooden stick to the normal wooden stick. And then I set the quantity to my item count, which I set up here. All right, and so we're extending what a lambda normally does, which is take an old item and make a new item. And we're taking an old item and we're making a new item and adding a quantity to it. Right, that's important. The normal lambda doesn't add a quantity, it just creates a new item. So when you're making your lambdas and you think, oh, I'm taking one glow stick and I'm turning it into 90 drug packs, you would need to like set the quantity here. You need to like actually create the 90 objects or something along those lines, or make a new lambda that loops over the number of items to create, because it's a 1-to-1 for now, but you could totally make it 1-to-many. And then eventually when the verify item type by slot type happens, we would print our custom function here. I mean, that would be something that we overrode. And then lastly, there's some other stuff which isn't part of the lambda. It's just part of the action. Since brooms can be cut up into long wooden sticks, it's accounting for that here. So that's basically a lambda. I mean, if you've booted up the game, you've cut down a tree and you've broken a stick into 2, a long wooden stick into a wooden stick. So I'm not really gonna boot into the game and show you that. And that's kind of really all I was gonna talk about today, other than the UI stuff. So any questions for that? I'll go and pause. Lambdas are relatively simple. I mean, in reality, it's 2 lines of code to basically turn a wooden stick into 3 long wood, or turn a long wooden stick into 3 wooden sticks. Although I guess you can count this as code too. Is there any part of that wasn't clear? Yeah. No worries, Genry. I get it. I'm gonna do a quick stretch and hydro homie. You have a question about proxy? No, that's fine. Lambdas, I didn't expect lambdas to take too long, and I actually over-explained them a bit. I'm surprised that I was able to fill 40 minutes with a lambda talk. There's a lot of examples. I mean, you just unboxing lambda is probably one that I use the most. When you think about boxes of ammo or gift boxes or things like that, this is I've heavily abused the unboxed lambda. It answers a bunch of questions like, hey, how do I set the ammo count of an object? Because ammo is not like a normal item that has quantity, so you gotta do it on the server only. That's like anti-hacking, cheating stuff. All right. Well, okay, so we'll go ahead and pause there and do a little drawing for UIs, because I want to jump into, I want to eventually build a UI, like a main menu. Like I really eventually want to like show you guys how to make a main menu and how to use the UI and how to interact with it. And so in order to do that, there's a couple foundational things we need to touch on and understand before we can actually do that. So from my perspective, UIs are probably one of the hardest things to tackle in DayZ, just because like map making or vehicles, or really any multi-disciplined activity, it spans multiple concerns within DayZ. So there's stuff that lives in 3 game, so like the definitions of the game, like the thresholds for my hunger and thirst, those are constant values that live in the 3 game world, kind of outside of the 4 world purview of items and objects, which are things that I interact with, like a book, which might open a UI, so like an action, or me pressing escape, which is user input in the mission, so 5 mission, and where the actual UI and menu state is handled. And so I sort of rattled a bunch of things off, and we're going to go ahead and try to sort of talk about that a little bit today. So you have, 3 game. I'm just going to go, you have 3 game. You're going to have 4 world. And you have 5 mission. All right. And so with UIs, you kind of deal with stuff in all 3 of these, and it can get a little complicated because of that. All right. Now, let's say you're wanting to just think about what a UI is, or how do you build a UI, or really how do you think about a UI is constructed. Okay. Now, when we look at a web page, or even the view that we're looking at right now, like on my desktop, I have a bunch of tabs, I have some buttons, I have widgets, and they all have to have some type of order or priority or logical placement to one another. All right, and I say that because they physically exist on the page in different spots. One is higher than the other, some are next to each other, they have spaces, and so you need to be able to quantify and define what those things are, and you need to do it in such a way that is generic and applies to any widget, really. And so starting off, there's always the notion of a root widget or a root thing. All right, in order to display anything, even this window that I'm seeing, there's a main window, like it's this overarching thing that my mouse is drawing over. It's a big square. It fills my entire screen. And if I were to make it smaller, it would be this smaller square here, right? And so we call that the root, right? And if I were to draw that, you know, I can logically say that it is, you know, ID1. I can name it, okay? This is important because if I can name something, then I can start referring to it later. I can order it, I can delete it, I can reorder it, I can modify its properties, okay? So my main window now exists. I have a name for it, it's 1. And now I want to sort of add some more things. And so I'll start adding what we call child widgets. And so maybe I want a search bar, something where I can type into. And then maybe I want and in fact, maybe that's not a search bar. I really want that to be I want a button to be here. And so I need to put something inside of here, and then another sort of widget which represents the text bar that I can actually put text in. Okay. And then maybe I have a list of objects that I want to display, like a list of mods that I'm displaying. And so it might have cards or categories for things in here. And you might notice that I'm using specific colors, and that's because I want to show that there is a logical hierarchy to the way we're placing these things. All right, and that hierarchy is how we interact with the widgets themselves. Draw them, modify them, manipulate them, and add things and inject things in between. All right, and so it's very structured. It's top down, you know. The widget 1 has 3 children. It has 3 purple widgets inside of it, named 2A, 2B, 2C. All right, and then the widget 2A has 2 widgets inside of it, which is 3A, 3B. Okay, and 2B has its own set of children in there. (4A), 4B, and so on and so forth. I won't do all of it, but basically you can kind of see a pattern emerging here, right? Where we have sort of nested dolls or nested containers inside of each other, and we are organizing the data in the way that we want it to be arranged, right? We have, in this case, we have a title bar or whatever, and then we have a list where things are vertically arranged, and then we have inside of that list cards where things are horizontally arranged. And this is just all scaffolding and background for what we would call UI design. All right. Now, Daisy has a language or a format to describe what you're seeing here: the width of a box, the position of it, the layout, its relative size to one another, to items around it. And since it has its own format for that, we can interact with it in Enforce script. And so you'll see inside of UI classes, if I come over here, I go to scripts, go inside mission, go inside GUI, let's do the new UI, there's the main menu, and here's the main menu. So main menu itself has a bunch of stuff inside of it, has a bunch of widgets. I've been referring to these little boxes in here as widgets. You know, the UI elements are normally called widgets, just for fun. And so you can see that there is a differentiation between certain widgets, like text, or just a normal widget, or what other type of widgets are there? Main menu is kind of boring. But one thing that's important is that when you scroll down inside of the layout or the UI, you'll notice that most of these have an init function that returns a widget, which is good because when I create myself, like when I create a UI thing, I need to be able, when I create one of these boxes, I need to be able to tell my parent Like, hey, I'm created. Like, remember me so that you can update me in the view. So if you ever are wondering, you know, hey, I'm in a menu and I want to know what it looks like, you come down here to the init method and you can see, oh, GUI, layouts, new UI, main menu. So this is where the actual layout would exist. Let's go ahead and look at it. GUI, layouts, new UI, and this is data that's extracted from the game. Main menu layout. Okay, so if I open up here, you'll see that there's a, you know, the name of the widget, and then some brackets, which represent like a set of data. All right, you don't really need to care about what this information is, but if you look at some of these properties, it'll sort of make sense of what they are. Is the frame visible? Do I ignore my cursor, my pointer? Where's its position? What's its size? You know, X, Y. Since we're talking about the screen space, we have no Z. We just have X and Y. Do we align our centers horizontally or vertically? Do we use exact positions? And then, you know, what's my priority on the view? If I'm drawing 100 things, which one should be on top? And if I open up this, its children, you'll notice that again, we have a bunch of things inside of here. And so each one of these highlighted rows could very well represent these purple widgets. I have my children are these things. And so each one of these children also have children inside of it, and so on and so forth. And so you can kind of see how a complex UI is really just a collection of widgets all nested inside of each other. And so in one of the first videos we talked about Workbench, you would open this layout file in Workbench and you would actually position these widgets on top of each other, and you would have little buttons that you could click to set the width and height. I'm not going to go over that at the moment, but this is basically kind of the beginning of a widget, or beginning of a UI, and you can make your own layouts if you want. I have only made my layouts or UIs for new things. You tend to hook into the existing UI. And what I mean by that is, if I come over to this, maybe I might need to open Workbench for this one. So what I've personally been experimenting with the last few weeks, last couple months, is trying to write the least amount of UI code to get my UI stuff in the game. And so I found that there's actually a lot of flexibility in being able to just create a small widget. So in this case, you're looking at a single bar. It looks like this. It's a single bar with the word corrosion in the middle. All right, it looks very similar to the temperature widget. All right, I copied the temperature widget and then I just changed it to green, and then I changed the text. All right, so it's meant to be very, very simple. However, getting it into the game was a little bit was more of the challenge. So, you know, when we talk about how do I actually get my stuff into the game, well, I found the inspect menu. So when you middle click a button, when you middle click an item, there's a menu that comes up. All right, and if I were to start doing that, where's the inspect? Whatever. Right, so I'm showing like the actual UI layout here. Very simple, right? It's just a box with the word corrosion on it. Okay. However, to get it into the menu, you find the layout you want. You override the init function. Okay. Get the root layout existing root layout. So basically, if anyone else modded this inspect menu, I would be saying get their stuff too. Then create my own widget. Okay, so get my widget, get my layout from my definition where I put it here. So grab my file, load it into the code. Okay. And then find the existing panel from my root. So come back here. Grab this panel 2B so that I have a reference to it, and then add my own element as a child. So basically it's like saying, hey, go grab 2B and then add my dude down here. And that's essentially what happened in the end. I have a little green bar on all the items. So this is just adding my element to the UI. I need to be able to then interact with that element based on the status of an item or something. It could be a player, it could be my temperature, it could be a sickness, it could be getting shot, or it could be a bunch of things. It could be an action. I need a way of being able to interact with my UI. And so for me, the inspect menu had a function called set item. So when you inspect an item and you look at its temperature, its wetness, its quantity, this function is what sets that information. Populates the UI and makes the red temperature bar redder or pink or whatever, the blue wetness bar to be bluer. So I basically say call the super, so do what you normally would do, and then have a little wrapper to make sure nothing bad happens if the item doesn't exist, and then I call my own function. Okay, and this is basically a copy of the temperature function, other than I grab my own widget and I set it to some color. All right. And from this, I've essentially been able to hook into the existing menu with as little code as possible. So when an update happens here in the future, which we know DayZ will update, they can potentially change the UI, which they've been known to do, which is okay. We want them to be giving us updates as often as possible. And so my code has a lot less chance of failing because the surface area is smaller. And I think this is a better way personally. Might take a little bit more cognitive understanding to get through it, but I'm hoping that this intro explanation kind of sets the foundation, or at least gets you thinking into how to actually build a complex UI. So this is about as fast as I could go through all the pieces. We'll definitely dive into each individual part later for a main menu, because I kind of blazed through it pretty quickly. But for anyone that's like dealt with UIs before or is an experienced programmer, this should help you sort of jumpstart some UI stuff. And for the item manager, you can kind of see me doing the same thing here. When you mouse over an item, it gives you a tooltip. I'm trying to touch as little code as possible, so my classes are very small. And I'm not overwriting the whole UI layout. And that's another big thing in my opinion. I didn't copy the tooltip layout and overwrite it completely. And the reason why is because I want my mods to be as compatible with other mods out there. And if I'm completely overwriting the UI, I could essentially be steamrolling other mods, and I don't want to do that. So that's main menus in a nutshell. We'll deal more with those later. All right, Solomon, you can ask your question. About proxies. Unless Genry has a question about UIs. Shout out to those that are out there. Thank you for hanging out today on this Saturday. Always nice to see people wanting to learn. Layouts as default configurations for class. It just reads what's in there and creates widgets. You can do most of it manually. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there are some things you can't change in a layout runtime, like fonts or I want to say positions, but that doesn't sound right. I feel like you can move a UI around as you choose. But yeah, there is a lot that you cannot change. And I have a feeling it's due to anti-cheating, or that's the first thing that comes to mind, or it's just a legacy thing, you know. Like I'm in the 50-50 camp because I remember it was either Steve or one of the other devs, maybe Lad or someone, basically talking about how um like the UIs don't have to be complicated, so like there's really no need for MVC because at least in vanilla you don't have like website based web forms, whereas mods are kind of trying to make trader mods have those lists and things that look like a web page, and I don't think the game is really set up for that type of gameplay, and I think that's just something that we'll never get. Although Dab has modded an MVC framework, which is pretty cool. Honestly, if you know that pattern, it's very familiar and easy to create new things. Okay, Solomon says, I've created a new vest. It's working fine. Now my proxy is a plate on that vest. The plate is fine when the vest isn't equipped on player, but when equipped, the plate goes all wrong. I redid the spine 3, the proxy, and the vest. Let's see here. Let me pull up these images. Yeah, these are looking like some bad weight paintings. Well, is that plate one item? Because I think that's the problem. Yeah. So here, let me open up this image for the video. Open link. Open link. Yeah, so if you see here, right, like when the item's on the ground, non-simulated state, it's pretty good. But then when you put it on, it pushes out. And so if you've noticed with like the fog mod and other mods that have like, magazine proxies on the chest, you'll see that they're horizontally on like one spine. Whereas your plate is vertical, and so it's covering 3 bones, and so you essentially need to. I mean, this is a tough one. I might put it on the spine 3 or it's because it's a single piece. To be honest, if it was broken up into a few pieces, like this guy up here, and they could move independently. Is your model config discrete as well as this thing called is this thing discrete? Otherwise it'll stretch. It almost feels like this isn't fully defined, to be honest. And have a model CFG on the plate. That's fine. I'm pretty sure discrete is default. I'd almost think that this proxy is not. I would maybe redo this one from scratch. This feels like a redefinition of the bones is not done correctly. No, I don't think it needs to be weight painted, but it needs to be connected to the right bone. Yeah, isn't spine 1 the base? It's been a while since I've done modeling. I try not to do modeling anymore. I'm not very creative when it comes to texturing and stuff. I'd rather just build code. Have somebody else give me the item, like the Infinity Gauntlet. I imported that the first time, and it was like, sure, it worked and it looked all right, but AJ made it look really nice. Yeah, so I mean, if you look at here, let me open Object Builder. Actually, project. Of course. Why is that doing that? What's this? Is this Discord overlay? Why is this? I have no idea what that is. Why is Discord overlay on? There we go. Oh my gosh, that was annoying. No wonder my games yesterday were having issues. Oh, so back to the UI. Basically, don't go into layout until you hit something that can't be modified from script. Yeah. And let's see. Okay, well, what can we modify in script? Let's go into the class widget. Let's see what a widget does. Class widget managed. Let's see. It translates a string. So basically, you can give it a string ID from a string table. It'll turn it into whatever you want. The global left value of widgets. I'm not sure if that is left value or not, but you can get the name. You can get the widget type, you can show it, you can enable it, you can hide it, you can get its flags, you can sort it, you can clear its flags, you can set user data, you can get user ID. We can get position size, we can set the transform. We know our parents, we know our children. Get script. Oh. Get scripted handler from widget. Action. What even is a scripted handler? Action targets cursor. A scripted widget event handler. Vision obstruction, PP effect types. Oh, okay, so there's a notion of a scripted widget event handler for players, targets, attached objects. Ooh, this is interesting. Oh, this must be the UI part of actions. Because again, actions are, they span all 3 layers, 3 game, 4 world, 5 mission, because there are constants in the game. There's the world actions, and then finally the UI stuff. Well, yeah, it's an easier list of what you can do because of what I was just going through here. Like, there's nothing here. You can find widgets. You can get your siblings, but that's about it. So there's text widgets. You can set the text offset. You can set the spacing, exact size. There's an you can put outline on text. Set a shadow. Multi-line text widgets are somewhat not useful. Rich text widget, getting lines. Render target. When period is greater than 1, then every nth frame will be rendered. Oh. Image widget. So the image widget is what people mostly use for their backgrounds, for their main menus. It's what I've used to set the file. You load the file, you set it, you rotate it. Load mask texture. This is an alpha mask, how you could fade things in or out. You get the mask progress, so you have a number between 0 and 1. Multi-line edge UI widget. A lot of these things are just like setting the text in the shadow outlines. Canvas widget, I believe, is only for debug tag. Edit box, passer box, slider widget, progress bar. Buttons are important. We'll go over buttons. Because one thing we didn't talk about today was how do you interact with a widget? So if I click a button, how do I do something? We'll talk about that a little bit later. Did I try to make custom styles for widgets? Oh, yeah. That's one of the things for like the main menu we'll talk about. Because for every widget there is, let's see, GUI. Let's go and click in here, main menu. Right, if you click on any widget, there's a style thing down here, right? I know I've seen it somewhere. Yeah, style right here. Right. That's the thing I'll have to look into. I don't even know where you set these, right? Where you talking about up here where you can set. Oh yeah, I downloaded the style sheet. One of the devs made it. I thought it was all right. I'm not sure if this is what you were talking about. There's a style editor? Where? Oh, look and feel. Oh. Open progress bar. Okay. Yeah, let's check this out. This is kind of cool. Go ahead and give us a little bit of. Okay, so the difference between that and this, you can see up here. Oh, right. Yeah, okay. This makes sense. So, like, if you think about it, the style for the progress bar for stamina is to be fully white, and then when it's not, like, on an area bar, it's gray. And then same with quantity. It's just a white bar with gray, and then loading is red with the bar when you're loading in. Okay, I see what you're saying. This is kind of cool. So you're ideally we would make our own style. It would be a mod that somebody could sub to, and it would go and change all the UIs essentially. Or is that something that they could select? I'll have to poke in this a little more. This is kind of cool. Yeah. Yeah, because in order to change the HUD, the HUD notifier colors like of hunger and thirst, it's actually a real pain. It's a huge pain. It's like 9 different things in the script world. I have it over here. I did it for the server that I'm on. In-game HUD notifiers. So you have the heat notifier, that's sleep. The tendency display. So like for health, you have to completely override the base game function. It's annoying because again, because it's not easily overrideable. But yeah. Yeah, class is going well. We're winding down. We've kind of gotten to the end of the day. If there are any questions, are there any other questions about what we talked about? Kind of a nice easy one. We talked about lambdas, proxies, and we started talking about the main menu, GUIs, GUI, graphical user interface. And then eventually on the style. Talked fonts, no. Didn't talk fonts. But you can. I mean, fonts are pretty simple. They're EDS. They're just like any other image. You would get the font itself, the font file. You'd click and drag it into the game, and it would create an EDS for you. And then you just refer to it in your widgets by the name here. Easy peasy. Like once you know how to import images into the game, everything kind of follows the same. Let's see. Question. Say you wanted to use a Lambda to remove an item from a box. Would you make the box go back into inventory and create the new item in the player hand? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You would... Yeah. So like you would have an action that has a condition for looking at that box. Okay? Right? Because the item's inside that box. So your action would say, hey, if the player is looking at a box with the item inside of it, then run this Lambda, and I'm going to give it this old item, and I'm going to tell it what the new item's going to be, and I'm going to override the location to be in my player hands. Not with lambdas. No, lambda is purely meant to replace an old item with a new one. So in this case, you would just have... Let's see, how would I do that? If it's to remove a cigarette from a box. You would probably just use inventory junctures to push the item back into the inventory, to be honest. That's what I would do. I would use an action that's either interact or whatever, which would move the box of cigarettes out of my inventory, back into my, out of my hands into my inventory if there was a spot available, and then create a cigarette in my hands. Because, like, if you think about it, there's a function called create item in hands, right? No, it's get item in hands. You would need to bring the item into. So player hands are actually are really difficult. Honestly, I personally like just dumping items on the ground because there's a lot of syncing involved in what you just asked. That now that I've like talked about it a little bit, so ideally you'd probably want to create an item and then move it into the hands. Can I just move item into move item? Oh wait, from hands? Okay, so look at that. Some keyword searching. Looks like we have some predictive movement here. It's like, okay, so here's the quick bar. Here's how the quick bar handles it. Oh, set hands. That's what it is. Sets current inventory location type to hands. Boom, right there. Oh, there is a create in hands. Okay, cool. Nice. I just couldn't remember the name. Yeah, and it's good that you brought this up because if you look at the things this create in hands is attached to, it's attached to restraining a player. Like when you weasel out of a restraint, it puts the item in your hands. So this is a good example of, yeah. So here you see action uncover head. So for like a burlap sack. So this is kind of what you're wanting almost, but the opposite. So I would study this a little bit and see if this gets you what you want. Moving the box back into the... Let's see, there's set ground, so maybe there's like set inventory too. So there's set ground, set attachment, set cargo. Oh yeah, here you go. You would probably do set cargo auto. And you'll just dump it into the person's inventory. So take the... Is this called anywhere? Inside of here. For predictive, take entity to cargo EX. Okay, cool. Who calls this? Huh. This seems safe though, right? Because it's basically saying if it's a server, do it in a juncture. Otherwise, it's your local, so do it predictive. This seems like what I would call. So like predictive take entity to cargo EX, and the cargo that you would pass in here would be your human inventory or like the backpack or whatever you want to put it into. The entity AI item, this would be the cigarette case themselves, and then the row and column of the inventory. That seems a little bit intense, though, having to specify the row and column itself. You might have to do some more peeking into that, but it seems like it's doable at the very least. Although it might be kind of challenging. Good wrestle. If you figure it out, let us know, and we'll talk about it. Okay. Anything else? Anything else from the group? Kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel of ideas here. I mean, I'm dreading the HTTP API one. Awesome. All right. Well, for the video, thank you all for watching. We will see you next week. For those that are in Discord, I appreciate you being here, and I will also see you next week. Thank you all.